It fits neatly into 2 cupped hands. The clay is the color of milky tea, covered in tiny wedge-shaped scratches, and it was made somewhere around 1730, before the Common Era. That alone makes it older than Tutankhamun, older even than the founding of Rome. In 1911, a curator at Yale University cataloged this little brown rectangle. He wrote down a single word next to it, pharmacy, and tucked it away into a drawer with other medical texts from ancient Mesopotamia. At the time, cuneiform was still being deciphered. To an untrained eye, the Babylonian words for onions, garlic, and animal fat looked entirely identical to the ingredients used in ancient apothecaries. So the tablet went to sleep. It sat in a dark cabinet in New Haven, Connecticut for 7 decades. 2 world wars happened above its head. Entire fields of archaeology grew up around it, while generations of scholars walked right past the drawer without ever opening that particular file. The oldest cookbook in human history survived the collapse of ancient empires, only to be hidden in a modern filing cabinet by a clerical error. In the early 1980s, a French scholar named Jean Bottero finally asked to see the tablet. Bottero was a former Dominican monk who left his order to study the dead languages of the Near East. When he read the cuneiform, he realized those tiny scratches were not prescriptions, they were dinner. Bottero believed that if a culture hasn't been understood through its food, it hasn't really been understood at all. To him, the kitchen was the most honest room in any civilization. He translated 25 recipes from the clay. The instruction for one particular stew, called tuh'u, takes about 50 seconds to read. Leg meat is used. Prepare water, add fat, sear, fold in salt, beer, onion, arugula, cilantro, Persian shallot, cumin, and red beet. Crush leek and garlic. Sprinkle coriander on top. That is the entire text. There are no quantities. There are no cooking times. There is no fire setting. Whoever pressed those words into the clay was writing for a chef who already possessed the muscle memory. The careful sequencing of ingredients and the wide variety of imported spices point directly to haute cuisine, cooked exclusively for palace kings and temple priests. This leaves us with a distinct problem. Recreating a 4,000-year-old culinary masterpiece requires executing a recipe where the original author left out all the instructions. Bottero translated the words, but he never put a pot on the fire. In 2018, a team from Yale and Harvard, an Assyriologist, curators, and food chemists decided to physically bring the tuh'u stew back to life. The process begins in a heavy pot, addressing that incredibly brief instruction to add fat. Today, rendering sheep fat until it smells like a pasture gives us the base. To the original reader, add fat was an intimate, highly specific command. The Babylonians used dozens of distinct words for fat. They categorized fat from the tail of a sheep entirely separately from kidney fat, goose fat, or fat separated by hand from a young lamb. The cook reading the tablet knew exactly which jar to reach for. Next, the lamb is seared in that rendered fat until the moisture cooks off and the edges turn the color of old wood. Even this step required careful testing of different temperatures to figure out exactly what the Akkadian verb for sear meant in physical practice. Then come the herbs and alliums. We fold in wild Persian shallots, milder and grassier than modern grocery store varieties, and arugula. In this era, arugula was deeply peppery and bitter, functioning as a stewing herb rather than a raw salad green. A generous splash of unhopped wheat beer goes in to deglaze the pot. The Babylonians brewed many varieties of beer. The thick, everyday beer you drank through a straw was entirely different from the specialized beer splashed into a royal banquet stew. Reconstructing this dish requires us to reverse engineer the deeply ingrained, unspoken cultural habits of the Babylonian kitchen, finding meaning in the gaps between the nouns and verbs. The final solid ingredient folded into the pot is peeled and chopped red beetroot. Finding a red beet rolling around in a Babylonian stew bowl forced historians to rewrite a small piece of the agricultural timeline. The standard history of food placed the cultivated red beet much later, firmly in the Roman period at the earliest. After crushing the leek and garlic into the mixture, water is poured in just until everything is covered. The heat is lowered and the lid goes on. Over the next hour, the pot whispers to itself. The sharp edges of the ingredients begin to break down, mingling into a scent that is earthy, sweet, and faintly bitter. The color of the finished liquid is shocking. The beets stain the entire stew a deep, opaque burgundy, settling into a dark violet that looks like an autumn dusk. Every choice made in the kitchen, the temperature, the amount of water, the timing, was an educated guess about a person who lived thousands of years before refrigeration. Yet what emerges from the pot is miraculously, undeniably food. The taste of the tuh'u stew is remarkably balanced. The roasted bitterness of the beer cuts perfectly through the natural sweetness of the beet, while the cumin grounds the broth. The lamb loses its tough structure entirely, breaking down into a texture resembling savory silk. It does not taste exotic, and it certainly doesn't taste like a museum artifact. It tastes like the comforting dinner your grandmother might make on a cold evening, if she lived under the rule of Hammurabi's grandson. The tablet also contains a very different recipe. It calls for an unwinding stew, a simple, clear broth made with leeks and garlic, thickened with crumbled sourdough bread. It is, essentially, a stew to take the day off your shoulders. It's the kind of dish you eat after a long day at the temple, kicking off your sandals to let the steam warm your face. The Babylonians named the feeling of needing a meal to take the edge off. It suggests that even across 4,000 years of silence, the motivation behind a home-cooked meal hasn't changed at all. 3,750 years ago, a palace scribe pressed a damp reed into clay and wrote down what worked in his kitchen. That little tablet slept in a misclassified drawer for 70 years, until curious scholars read the words and put a pot back on the fire. Meat, water, fat, beer, beet, garlic, heat, time. We have been making these same basic gestures for millennia. The conversation has never really stopped. If those historians hadn't opened the drawer and weighed the ingredients, those cuneiform scratches would have remained nothing but words on clay. Every time you cook an old recipe, it is a small, vital refusal to let the past die. If you enjoyed this kitchen experiment, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button below. Leave a comment with the oldest dish your family still makes. I read every single one to get ideas for future episodes. And if you haven't seen the episode on the Egyptian beer bread that built the pyramids, you can find it right next to this video. Thank you for spending your evening rummaging through a Yale drawer with me. Until next time, keep a pot on the fire, keep a book open, and I will see you in the next episode.